First order of business is recite the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Eve or John, is one of you going to take a roll call?
Yes, Agostinelli,
Here.
Robertson,
Here.
Klein,
Here.
Yuli.
Here.
DeGood is absent, excused. Fudge.
Here.
Racine.
Here. Next item on the agenda is public comment, and unless my glasses are deceiving me, there's nobody out there to comment, so we will proceed beyond that. Next item is a review and approval of the agenda, and if there's any conflicts of interest, we should hear about those.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Support. Any discussion on that motion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Next item is a review of the minutes from our May 14th meeting. Are there any proposed changes to those?
Make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Support.
Any further discussion on that? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. The next item's correspondence. I noticed on our desk this evening, John, there was a May 27th correspondence to the Planning Commission from the Grand Traverse Bay Waterkeeper. Any other correspondence that we should be aware of?
That's all that we have.
Okay? And you'll make sure that the copy of this correspondence gets to the applicant for the, before the public hearing that we've got in a couple of weeks on that.
Yes, we'll send it to them and ask if they'll be prepared to respond to the comments in the letter.
Great. Next up is reports. Molly, anything from the town board to report?
Couple of things, they're kind of county-related. One of the county commissioners last night at the meeting mentioned that they're working on safe routes to schools across Frankie Road. There's a lot of people who park at the Myers parking lot and cross over, and so they're kind of doing a little audit to see how many people are going, but it might require something else, but it's more of a county thing. The other is the county passed the point-of-sale septic ordinance for anything within 300 feet of water. So there's that. And then the township is, for the first time since I've been around, is doing a formal wage study. So we've hired an outside firm, and we're going to take a look at how everybody's paid. So
Thanks.
that's about it.
Bob, anything for the ZBA to report?
No meeting.
Chris is usually our Parks and Rec person. Either of you folks got any? Parks and
We have
Rec
a meeting
information?
upcoming this Monday, so there'll be more to report on the next meeting.
Thanks, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
Molly and I are on the Joint Planning Commission, but we meet quarterly, and we haven't met for about a month, and it'll be probably, what, is it mid-July, I
July.
think? Is that our next one?
July.
Unless something happens between now and then. Okay, thanks. John or Steve, any staff report this evening?
Not really much, just, yeah, lots of administrative site plan reviews are kind of sent out at the moment. We're waiting for resubmittal on a few of those. And then I also, to piggyback off the Safe Routes to School, I did attend a webinar on the Safe Routes to School. Yeah, it sounds like it's more like County Road Commission controls Frankie. They're thinking about a safe crossing, but it's TCAP School, and then that's Myers parking lot. So Township, I'm not entirely sure what our role is. I mean, we're supportive of safety generally, but unless there's something specific we need to do, it's more just kind of keep tabs on it.
Okay.
Also, that portion of Myers parking lot is actually in the city, if you look at the border. So we're a little down the list of active participants on this particular one.
Is the Montessori school in the city, or is that in the township?
That is the township. Frankie is the border, and then it jogs over at a section line. So most of Myers is in. It's a funky border right there.
It was odd.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So, yeah, we'll keep tabs. If there's anything to report, we'll forward it on.
Great,
And I
thank you.
just wanted to add that school that went in, that they're exempt from local zoning, so there was no township planning review in that process. And so it's kind of awkward to be at this position to try to deal with things that maybe we could have helped to address when they were actually citing that facility at that location. So,
I got it. Thanks. Looks like next on the agenda is unfinished business, and I don't see anything listed there, so move on to new business. Item 7A is Planning Department Report 2025-43, some training for us about capital improvements program.
Do a little overview. Just some background. The Township Board has formed a capital improvement planning committee, a CIP committee, or capital planning committee. They formed that at the end of March, and they've now met here at the end of April and May, working with staff in drafting a capital improvements plan for the township to actually look at these larger projects, sometimes multi-year, multi-phase projects that can be in categories like water, sewer, parks, non-motorized trails, facilities such as this building, road improvements when we share in like special assessments. So any kind of large major project to start to like categorize them, plan for them over CIPs are typically a 6-year period, and use that to inform kind of the near-term future, and then have more of the details on the next years inform the budget process. So it's information that will help the township board when they're doing their budget process. And the CIP committee has 6 members. It's the supervisor, the manager, trustee representative for the building and grounds committee, trustee representative of the Parks and Rec Commission, engineer, and planning director. So kind of anyone involved in some of those major categories. This is before Planning Commission because it is actually in the Michigan Planning Enabling Act that the Planning Commission is part of reviewing and recommending CIP to the legislative body. So everything in italics is a quote from a state law, but that was kind of the section of talking about capital improvement plans in the Michigan Planning Enabling Act. And mostly what staff was envisioning kind of as the role is, again, it's for the township to manage these capital assets, help the township in their budgeting, but also it's really like that that any capital projects align with long-term visioning, as is in the master plan or strategic plan, and as the Planning Commission is heavily involved in the creation of the master plan before it's adopted by the board. Sort of reviewing the CIP as one of those implementation tools is an appropriate role for the Planning Commission. So we highlighted some of the goals that were in the recently adopted master plan that will all be aligned with potentially things in the CIP. So we had things with natural resources, water quality, parks and trails, transportation infrastructure, especially water and sewer, and public safety. And so what we wanted to do, the CIP committee, they met yesterday and looked at essentially a draft, and they're getting feedback from staff, from the Parks and Rec Commission, Building Committee, to kind of work out some of those details. They kind of took a first draft of the fully formatted CIP yesterday, and that'll down the line come to Planning Commission. But what we wanted to do with some training tonight, we attended a webinar that MSU Extension and Michigan Department of Treasury hosted. And we put the link to the recording, but we wanted to view a section of it, about a half hour, that really gets to the meat of connecting the CIP to the master plan and kind of that overall vision. It's sort of in the middle because it was an interactive webinar, so everything in that first 11 minutes is them interacting with people who are on the webinar live, and everything after that was treasury related, which our township treasurer is the person with the expertise in that, and it gets into things like things that go over my head. So this was kind of the relevant section, so we wanted to do that as a training for Planning Commission.
think that'll be great. I've got a quick question. As I was looking at the statute,
Yes.
at the beginning, in that section 1, it talks about it's the planning commission's responsibility to put together such a capital improvement plan unless we're exempted from this requirement by charter or otherwise. Do you know, is our planning commission supposed to be doing that? Because I've been on the planning commission forever. We've never done it.
It was inserted when the Planning Enabling Act was done back in 2008.
Ooh.
And it's also, and it may have been an interpretation of it, but there was particularly on that second part at the bottom of there where it says, any township may prepare and adopt a capital improvement program. However, is only subsection 1 above is only mandatory if the township is alone or jointly with one or more additional units of government owns or operates a water supply or sewage disposal system. So it may have been interpreted that it's operated by, let's say, county BPW, but technically it is really a township system. So maybe it's been some of the interpretation, but it really is a function of planning and why this was really inserted in the Planning Enabling Act was because when you do the master plan, we often utilize zoning as the key implementation tool, but really the expenditures made by any community, city, township, or village in terms of water, sewer, streets, roads has a big impact in how that plan is ultimately implemented. So, I mean, I don't think we're gonna expect that the planning commission, first of all, this is a new process for everybody here at the township as we're going through this, so it's learning that the first year might be a little rough, but the idea is to set up a process it's an annual process. And the CIP it's a tool for the township board in terms of making budget decisions. They're not necessarily bound by it, but it's a way to organize projects so that they can evaluate which ones they want to pursue in terms of making the budget. It is also only probably as good as that current budget year. So there will be other projects that will be in the future that can be adjusted as time goes forward. But again, I don't think we're expecting that you to get into the weeds in terms of cost or details of the project, but generally looking at it from the standpoint of, does it make sense in terms of what the master plan talks about and envisions in terms of its goals? And does this help to advance those goals for the township as a whole? So we thought this would be a good opportunity to get a little background, and we thought the webinar might be helpful in that, at least thinking and understanding. It's really, in my mind, it's a fairly simple concept of projects, identifying them, cost, and what year they may be completed in, and so forth, and budgeted for. So, but it certainly is an essential piece to making good decisions, and I think that's as the township grows and gets more complex in terms of development and so forth, making good decisions really becomes essential. So.
I got a question for you. So the way it's gonna work is you're gonna sort of represent the planning part of it on the first few meetings, and then you guys will put together some kind of a framework, and then it'll come back to us in June, and we'll review it and put our input in. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, well, so the CIP committee or capital planning committee is really kind of the one they're gonna kind of be the keepers of the CIP, because there may be changes throughout the year that may be adjusted. But we'll be kind of preparing it. My guess is it probably won't be June. It's probably gonna be pushed back maybe to July, but the goal is to get it to here to the planning commission and then make some recommendation to the town board, and then when it gets to the town board, allow them a meeting or a couple meetings probably to just digest it and see if it makes sense, and then again, can adopt it, but it's not necessarily bound by it. It's intended to be a guide, so.
Okay, thanks.
I'm still a little confused, I guess. It sounds like the planning commission has some role, but historically, we've always viewed the town board as in charge totally of the power of the purse and what we're gonna spend money on as a township. The
What we're
planning
gonna-
commission hasn't have much of any impact on that.
what we're
Right,
gonna
that-
spend money on, but we have a master plan, so if they start, not that they would, but if they start saying, well, we're gonna have 25 new parks, for example, well, it's not really in our master plan, and so from that perspective, I think that's where we kind of come in.
Work hand in glove with the town board on that, yeah.
Or we're gonna extend a sewer line down in this area that we've master planned as rural, and that would impact
Yeah.
Yeah, I
development in
totally- I
that
totally
area.
get that.
Yeah.
I totally get that. It's
I
just-
think part of the language here, the way it's structured too, is historically, the Planning Enabling Acts, even before this one, when they were consolidated and they used to have the individual Township Planning Act and City Village Planning Act, was really identified the Planning Commission as the one that adopted the master plan. But there was practice where it would often still go to the governing body, be it a township board or city commission, and they would adopt it. When the Planning Enabling Act was done, it does allow for that option. You can either have the Planning Commission adopt the master plan, or many communities, what they do is they take that other option and actually have the Planning Commission make a recommendation and have the governing body be the approval authority, which to me makes a lot more sense because they're often implementing a lot of different policies. So this may be reflective of the way the language in the statute is worded, is where historically and traditionally has been the Planning Commission prepares and adopts the master plan and doesn't necessarily recognize the legislative. I mean, it does a little bit after that, but I think that's kind of the spirit where I see it. And we're trying to work through it, understanding that there's limitations in terms of what the Planning Commission may know about, you know, the details of the water sewer systems and all the things that are going on in the parks and whatnot.
John, I had a quick question. With this, the CIP then, the funding obviously comes from local funds, but by processing this, are there federal or state funds that, if something is approved, can feed back into the communities?
Yeah, I mean, it's intended to identify funding sources. For instance, we still have a lot of projects that are going on that are unfunded by ARPA, which was the federal appropriation that was granted to the township, so some of those are funded. We have the trail that's being built, or it's going to be built out at the Commons Natural Area, that's a state grant, park grant that's used for that. So it's intended to look at those different sources to see where that funding will come from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can help identify also, if you know what projects are coming up, if they're at least accounted for, to go then seek out funding, because you already know what's coming. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
All right.
Any other questions for staff before they show us their training video?
All right.
Fire away,
All right.
guys.
We've got, so already this year, we've got a couple training videos, like, yeah. Let's see, let's make sure this actually works.
Where's the popcorn?
We could get some popcorn going downstairs if everybody wants. All right.
So, why do we write a plan for those capital expenditures, those large things, those infrastructures we were talking about on the previous slide? So before we get into the how of this, it's important to talk about the why. And a lot of times, when we're thinking about capital expenditures, we're thinking about projects that are large or expensive. We might need to use some sort of debt financing to fund these things, because they don't fit within just 1 year's budget. The level of spending on capital assets might vary from year to year. You buy a new roof 1 year, but you don't have to the next year. So it makes it harder to plan for. But also because of the size of the spending and the nature of the assets, these are going to have an impact for many years, whether financially it is paying them off or in terms of ongoing maintenance and operation. And the implementation often takes a lot of time for these expenditures, often happening in stages spanning multiple budget cycles. So we really have to think carefully and plan through these capital expenditures. Now, when budgets are tight, when you might have, scarce dollars, folks might think, okay, maybe we don't spend on capital improvement now. roads, parks, sewer, water, buildings, vehicles. Maybe these things get put on the back burner in favor of more regular operations. Or maybe not. It's a question, right? How are you going to spread that money around when it's tight? Or thinking of the ARPA housekeeping note further, when there's a lot of it, where is this money going to go? What is the best answer? And the correct answer really isn't that simple. You may have some extra funds now, you need to decide how to use them, and it's going to depend from community to community. What are you going to prioritize in your budget process? So we want to get the vibe of the webinar here. When you're going through your budget process, which many communities may be right now, what do you prioritize? Is it more that general operations or capital improvements? Or do you need some more information on this one? We'll give this a few moments for folks to get their answers in. As you start to think just real broad strokes here. And still seeing it tweak in, but we're keeping close to the same ratio with well over half saying that general operations. Another quarter saying, capital improvements might be prioritized. And then there's that solid contingency of, I think I need some more information on this. And I will probably be in that C group with you too. So now we're going to spend a few minutes on the basics of these capital improvement programs. You might hear them referred to as CIPs, and why we use them. Really the goal is that fiscal stability. And this means money set aside for those planned or predictable and sometimes unpredictable expenses. You can make a reasonable educated guess of, for example, how long your building's roof is going to last. Even when a community is financially struggling to make ends meet, it's not enough to balance one's budget in the short term. Really want to be thinking about that long-term fiscal sustainability and planning for some of those longer-term expenses, like potentially a new roof or a large vehicle purchase. So when we're thinking about the basics here, your annual budget tends to pay for the day-to-day operations stuff, right? Things like salaries, benefits, all of the staples and paper clips and memory cards you need to make an office run nowadays, phone, internet services, all of those operation costs as part of your sort of thinking the day-to-day work of doing government. The CIP, though, is really going to focus on a different kind of expenditure, those capital expenditures. These are those ones, they're the major one-time purchases that might have ongoing or a very large cost. The expectation here, like we saw in our word cloud, is that these things are going to last for a while. They have a multi-year life expectancy. It's generally to buy things, not that operations or maintenance. Thinking construction, replacement, major repair, or purchase. And like we talked about in our word cloud, they're large in size and generally fixed in nature. Thinking like facilities is a great example of capital expenditures. So thinking about our capital assets, those buildings, equipment, vehicles, we know they're not going to last forever, right? If you can find the car that lasts forever, please let me know because I'd like to buy one. But they have a lifespan, and they have, as every car owner knows, unanticipated problems that come up too. But we can start to plan for some of these. If we think about a roof as a simple example, and say the roof has a 20-year life, and we know it was put on 15 years ago. Well, planning for the expense of a new roof in about 5 years is probably pretty prudent in that situation. If we aren't, and our roof fails, then we're still going to have to pay for a new roof. We just haven't planned for it. So that mini financial crisis can come up with our roof. Thinking about your capital improvements plan is literally a rainy day fund in this situation, preparing for when that roof needs to be replaced. A prudent community will plan for these expenses and have a finance system in place to pay for those costs. It might be setting the funds aside so money is already in the appropriate fund. It could be a bonding program or a lease payback system. The point here is that you thought it through and planned for these larger purchases. These plans or documents are called the Capital Improvements Program, that CIP, and we have a photo of an example from Cadillac here on the slide of what that plan actually looks like. And this plan is really just another part of creating that long-term fiscal sustainability we talk about in this webinar series. Taking the actions or making investments to build a growing tax base and source of income in the future years. This means we should be targeting our CIP spending, thinking about, okay, what is gonna get us towards those goals that we have as a local community? What is going to help us create the growth, stimulate our local community? And the CIP can be a great tool for getting there. In addition to being a tool, we also have some statutory requirements for the CIP. So for these, we look to our Michigan Planning and Enabling Act, and the Michigan compiled laws reference is there for you. And additionally, the GASB, the Government Accounting Standards Board, Rule 34, gives some additional information on these capital improvements or capital assets. So starting first with the Michigan Planning and Enabling Act, in that MPEA, as we call it, it talks about these CIPs, and it says that cities, villages, counties shall have a capital improvements program. Now, we're going to remember our quick legalese and know that shall means you have to do this. May means it's optional. So for cities, villages, and counties, it's a shall. For townships, the CIP is optional. It's in that may. The one caveat there is if your township, alone or jointly with another unit of government, owns or operates a water supply or sewage disposal, then it shall have an annual CIP. Now, as you look at the Michigan Planning and Enabling Act, it gives this authority for creating the CIP to the Planning Commission of the local government. They're the ones responsible for preparing it. It sets the Planning Commission as the default because our planning commissions are designed to capture a wide swath of community interest when we think about their membership. All of the important segments are represented, so it seemed to the writers of the statute that that was the logical body to start with, at least with this authority, to do this long-term planning. Now, it also, the MPEA allows a local unit of government to assign this duty of creating the CIP to another department, agency, office, and we see lots of communities doing that. Your local government charter may provide for somebody else doing this duty, maybe a city manager. But it's important to understand for your community where this responsibility lives. What is our CIP process here? Is it with a planning commission or somebody else? And in the Michigan Planning and Enabling Act, it talks about how your capital improvements program shall be based upon the requirements of the local unit of government for all types of public structures and improvements. And it talks about how each agency or department head of a local unit of government with authority over those public structures or improvements shall, upon request, furnish lists, plans, estimates of time and cost for those structures and improvements to the entity creating the CIP so that they have the information to actually draw this up. You want to make sure that you're getting that information as you're putting this together, so the MPEA creates the space for that. So a few additional things about the CIP. It needs to be completed and reviewed annually. It's done after you've adopted a master plan. Again, thinking we need to have that larger community vision of a plan before we... It shows those public structures and improvements and the general priority order. It doesn't need to be super extreme, but there needs to be a priority here. And you can do this either as part of your annual budget, or maybe it's a separate process. And then it's for projects in the ensuing 6-year period as the minimum number. Some go out further, but at least 6 years as we're creating these CIPs. The other important legal requirement here are the standards from our Governmental Accounting Standards Board, GASB. And GASB 34 is really the primary one that relates to capital asset management. And in that GASB 34, it talks about a requirement for all units of government to inventory their government-owned assets for accounting and the audit statements. So local units report all their capital assets, including infrastructure, depreciation, and create that inventory under this GASB. So that can be a great place to start as a basis for the rest of your CIP work, because you're already doing this inventory as part of your audit, your local government sort of finances. So use that as a starting point. You've got the list, and we just need to plan into the future. And as we talk about a lot in programs at MSU Extension, these legal requirements really set the minimum here, right? Looking at our Michigan Planning and Enabling Act, or the GASBs, this is saying, okay, these are the minimum requirements. We can go above and beyond those minimum requirements too, right? Thinking about a township that doesn't have sewer or water infrastructure. They're not required to have a CIP, but might it be a good idea? Those are local conversations to have about whether this minimum legal requirement is enough, or do we want to go above? And in the next few minutes, we'll spend some time talking about what that might look like in the process and best practices here. But first, though, we've got another poll everywhere question for you all. With if you've dropped out of that browser, we've got a QR code up in the top corner. You can scan again and easily access this. But wondering, now that we know some of those basics about a CIP, what are some of those benefits that you see of a capital improvements program? Oh, my land use friends would be happy if they saw this word cloud forming as planning is front and center there. Also seeing transparency rising up. Yeah, thinking about how transparency can improve government trust, let folks know what to plan for. Oh, are you going to be repaving the street in front of my house anytime soon? I would like to know that. Also seeing confidence, communication, collaboration, direction, stability, sustainability, proactive. Yeah, we're getting out of that reactive space. It's not just, oh no, the water pump's gone out, we need to get one. It's a, no, we've got 2 on reserve and we have a plan to replace those when we need to. Awesome, thank you so much for sharing what some of those benefits are that you see from a capital improvements program. I'm going to turn things over now to Erica to talk a little bit about what we see as some of these benefits and talk about that process and best practices.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. And I love seeing confidence and resilience as part of that word cloud there, because that is really what we're talking about here. So one of the things we think about when we say, why do we create a CIP? So we started this at the beginning, but this fundamentally from a management position gives you a clear process for decision making. And rather than scrambling to address things as they come up, you aren't reactive, getting to some of that proactive piece, it ensures that your capital projects are in line with your community objectives, with your planned growth, and with your fiscal capacity. So really your left hand knows what your right hand's doing. And it's a foundation that allows your systems to work together. You know, do you have a plan for when those stairs need to be replaced? Is it budgeted for? Or are you waiting until there's an incident there, or they're unsafe and they're unusable and people can't access that part of your park or that space in your community? The CIP creates this system. It creates an orderly and systematic way of planning for the acquisition, the financing of your capital assets, and how you use them. And that encourages optimum use of the taxpayer dollar. We have an obligation to taxpayers to use these dollars that they've entrusted us with effectively, and this plan allows you to plan for that type of use. It puts your projects in a proper sequence, and it avoids things like, you know, there's nothing worse than you pave a new road, and then the next year you realize, oh great, we have to tear that up for sewer. And so all of this builds into trust. Residents and community know this is that you're planning, and your projects are coordinated. It also allows you to potentially save some money. Maybe the neighboring communities are going out for some similar work the next year, and you all can coordinate and do a shared bidding process. You know, it also allows you to coordinate and plan a little better, so maybe not everyone is tearing up different pieces of a shared road or a connecting road in consecutive years, and you can do all of the work at once. CIPs also give you time to explore finance options and get the best deal. It might mean you can plan better for grants. If you plan ahead, then maybe you can plan to go out for specific sources of funding. And it also shows grant funders that you've got a well-developed plan. You know what you're getting into. You've budgeted for these costs. And it allows you to be evaluated more highly in those ranking systems. It could also, develop, like I said, those economies of scale by partnering with other adjacent units of government, or maybe your county or somewhere nearby, so that you can save some money on these projects. It also allows you to be able to set aside money for big projects. Maybe you've got a park building that needs to be replaced in 10 years, or you've got some substantial renovations going. You're not going to be able to come up with those funds all at once. You need some time to set aside and know that you've got that big expense coming in 6 years, in 7 years, in 10 years, and that you're planning for that, so it isn't a huge hit to your overall budget when it comes. And it allows you to have stability. So if your expenses, what's coming, you can plan for that year over year. If you know you've got a big year coming up, then you're planning for that. It doesn't hit you all at once. And you can have sort of roughly the same amount year over year allocated to your capital projects. Another big benefit of a CIP is transparency and public engagement. The public knows what you're going to do, when you're going to do it. For example, you have a business in your community that knows the street in front of their business is going to be torn up in a few years or the next year. They can plan for that. They can adjust their operations so it minimizes the harm to the people who are affected by the direct works that you're doing for some of those kinds of things. And it can also help your elected officials. You're elected, we had maybe 15% of the people on today's call are elected officials. This helps you to have answers right away for your constituents. And it allows you to say, nope, we're not going to get to that this year, but it's on the list for next year or 2 years from now. And maybe that input, we'll talk a little bit later about how we prioritize these things, but maybe some of that input back from the public, you realize, oh, we might have to readjust our plan and move some things up, and it gives you a framework to do that. Okay, so there are a lot of things that are challenging about sticking to a CIP. And if you'd like to drop some of the things you found challenging or some concerns you might have into the chat, then we can talk about some of those issues too. But like anything else, the benefits just don't come by, oh, we have a plan, so we've got some benefits now. We're all set, we just wrote up a plan. That's not really how it works. You have to have a strong organizational commitment to the plan. Everybody has to buy in. It can't just be the finance department or the budget director or the planning commission who are committed to this. Everyone has to participate. And it also means executive leadership have to carry it out. So this has to be consistent across the organization. Where we see people have the best chance of success is if this is a mandatory part of the budget process or prior to the budget process, so it feeds into your budget. So how do we set ourselves up to realize all of those benefits? We need to have some best practices. And one of the things that we recommend here is that you have an advisory committee. And that advisory committee has representation from the chief executive, all departments, the finance officer, the planning commission, since we know for lots of communities that may be where this sits. And also, if you can do this, have some general public involved. Have some public representatives that can be a conduit for the kinds of things that might need to be included in the plan. Once you have that committee together, you really need to start with an inventory. You have to know what you have out there and what your capital assets are, and then what the project or purchase requests you have if you don't already have that. So one question we get a lot is what should count as a capital asset? And, you know, Treasury is probably gonna talk about this a little bit later in the presentation, but there isn't really a standard definition of what a capital asset is. The most important thing in this process is for you as a government to commit to what that definition is. You define it, so that everybody is working from the same definition and knows what should be submitted as part of a capital improvement plan and what isn't. And then the request from then you can request from each agency or department an annual inventory of those assets and what their public improvement projects might wanna be. So your basic inventory then would include, you know, number, the size, the capacity, what the current condition is, what the repair schedule is, what the replacement schedule is, things like that that allow you to just get a really good sense organizationally of what you have and where things are and what their repair schedule and replacement schedule might look like. We've been showing you the City of Cadillac's plan for a while here, and Cadillac has a really nice plan. They have a table, which we'll show you in a second, and then they have, it's easy to read and understand. You can click on that link and take a look at, you know, how the City of Cadillac does this. But each project, they create a table, and each project has an entire page, and it has a rank, the project name, the cost estimate, the source of funding, who the lead person is, the contact, and from that, you can see that, you know, this table might be a little hard to read on the slide, but you can take a look at the ones we sent out earlier or click on that link, and you can see that they have when the projects might be done, a detailed description, how this is going to impact and benefit the community, and, you know, what they think the project's impact on operation and maintenance costs is. This is an example of what that page looks like. And I see we have a question in the chat here about what proactive strategies, tools, and systems can be put in place to help prevent or eliminate the need for emergency capital projects. And we're gonna talk about that as we go along through the rest of the presentation, but if we haven't answered that question by the time we get to the end here, let's circle back and make sure that we touch on all of those kinds of things before we, before we conclude the entire meeting. So when you see this inventory, this gives you a sense of everything that might need to be done in the government. And once you have this inventory, then it's time to start looking at how do we score and rank the projects within. This is an important and essential part of your CIP, and it can be difficult because it's hard. At this point, you're saying, yes, we think your items are more important than others. And that can be challenging within the organization. But remember that what you're doing here in the CIP process is really a budget recommendation. This is feeding into the budget, and then the budget decisions are ultimately made by the legislative body of the government. And so that includes things like how much of this is actually funded, or if projects move up or down the priority list. But having this sort of equitable and objective space for listing all the projects and then scoring and ranking them in order of priority helps give the legislative body a base of information to make decisions from. When we think about scoring and ranking, the most important thing here is to have a formal criteria. And these will look different based on what the priorities are in your government, but the kinds of things that this would include would have, you know, the description, the location of the project, its purpose, how it connects to other projects. So we've created this table, but a lot of these projects might be interrelated, like, you know, the sewer project and a water project and a street project might have different levels of priority, but if you're going to do one, it makes sense to do all three at once. You want to have the cost. You probably have an idea of what kind of budget you're going to have for the year. And so, you know, the cost is important. The estimation of annual income and operation costs. So this might be an asset that, do you have to replace it now? No, but maybe the operational costs are going up at a rate that it makes sense to replace it a little earlier because you need new windows or you need some kind of energy efficiency that would really reduce your operation costs and help support other areas of the budget. thinking about timing as you're scoring and ranking, the importance within a particular department. So maybe a department really needs something, that it will help its functions. And then you want to think about the environmental, health, and safety impacts as well when you're scoring and ranking projects. Once you have everything ranked, you have to finance it. So you've got your list, you've got your project scored, and now you have to pay for it. As part of this, once we start talking about resources, it becomes easy for things to get competitive or for systems to break down. And so it's really important to have this be a mandatory part of your budget process for all departments within your government. And by mandatory here, we mean everybody's expected to participate. It also means that if a project is not in your CIP, it doesn't get funded. So that helps avoid people trying to run around the process or perhaps tap into, maybe there's a particular person on your legislative body that really wants to make sure something happens in their district. You want to be able to say, as an executive, as a staff, to say, no, we have a process here and everyone was invited and expected to participate in this, and here's our ranking. We aren't funding outside of that ranking. And we mentioned this, but it's really important that this be part of the budget process. You can think about this almost like a department in your budget process, that submitting the CIP is sort of like a department. This has to be included in order to consider all of the budget needs. And this gets to sort of this proactive strategy, right, of trying to make sure that you have all this together so that if something, you can avoid emergency capital projects, but if something does come up in an emergency, you have a structure for dealing with it. And then, sorry, Tyler, as you finance your CIP, it helps you get to these predictable and scheduled repairs. You build this into the annual process, you set aside funds to pay for them, again, eliminating this need for emergency projects, and you can set user fees if you need to, if it's an asset that works with that, to generate the funds to set aside for repairs. The other thing, when you're thinking about your CIP, is we talked about this helping you plan for grants, but it is important not to count on that as part of your financing. Grants can sometimes come with strings attached. You may be able to use it for some things and not others, but they're not a consistent funding source, and that grant environment, it can be very unpredictable. And so while you might set up to apply for grants, it's best not to count on that for certain repairs. So when you get to adopting your CIP, it's assigned to whoever it is in your organization, like Tyler specified earlier. You'll want to create a CIP advisory committee, review that inventory, score and rank the projects, and then review the projects to determine how they conform with your plan, your development policies, and the objectives and goals of the community. Then you'll provide opportunities for departmental and public feedback. You can see this is following along like your budget process. The planning commission or whoever is responsible for adopting the CIP and forwards it to the legislative body. And then the legislative body will review, adopt, amend, or reject the CIP. And then annually, you'll have your planning commission review and update that. And so the process goes again, and you're feeding whatever you learned from the previous one into the next one. And this gets to a question that was just in the chat about how do you handle new items that come up and aren't in the current CIP, that maybe you didn't know about it when the CIP was approved. There's learning built in. If you build this practice in, you integrate this each year. So maybe it isn't in your first version, you learn about it, and then when you update the next year, then you work those in via this process. So in summary, we have our best practices here to schedule expenditures, sequence your projects, prioritize and rank your projects, look at how you might finance them, and then they're adopted as part of your budget. And a CIP that includes these best practices gives you a solid framework for prioritizing your needs, maximizing funds, and maintaining your capital assets. So I'll turn it over now to the folks from Treasury to talk in more detail about capital asset planning.
Thank you.
That was pretty much the end of that.
So what's gonna be next for us on this one?
I think probably, so there's sort of a draft timeline from when the CIP committee first met. I think it will probably get bumped out another month, but since we do have the June study session, we could certainly bring at least a draft of what, so you can kind of see, here's what is coming down the line, here's what has been done so far, and if you have questions to refer back to staff to send it back to CIP committee. They've been meeting the second board meeting of the month, so they will have met the day before the
Yeah.
study session. They met yesterday, they'll do the same in the next month, so.
Yeah, we can provide you with a draft. It's not a, I think it's roughly about a, I don't know, about 20-page document, so it's not very big. It's a lot of tables and some background information, so it's very easy to review, but, and it's the first one that the township's doing, so we're not trying, it's a very kind of more simplified version of a CIP, just to get us into the process, because this will be an annual. I expect that, every May, we would be starting this up and kind of going through the summer months and getting it wrapped up by August, because at August or September, usually September is about that point when the township board is getting into the budget process, so they want to kind of wrap it up before they start that. But I think having, look at the draft at the the June study session might be a good chance just to kind of get your introduction to see. I know here they didn't really show you what like the actual document looks like, but it'll give you a chance to kind of peruse it and kind of digest it at that time.
And as things are being sort of formulated in draft form, I guess as a member of the committee, you're sort of carrying the mail for the planning end of it?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Cool. Anybody got any comments or questions for staff? Thanks for doing that. And moving along, I guess the next item of new business is item 7B, Planning Department Report 2025-44, to talk about a potential corridor plan for South Airport Road.
Yeah, so I think we're all kind of familiar with South Airport Road. It's 6 miles from, if you were to go from west at Silver Lake Road all the way to 3 Mile Road in East Bay Township. It's exactly 6 miles. And I think it's probably, in our minds, probably the most essential corridor in the region, quite frankly, because it serves a lot of purpose. It certainly, it's a river crossing. It's a major river crossing. It allows for, vehicles, truck traffic, commerce to cross the river. We don't have a lot of river crossings in the urban area. And this is one that can accommodate great volumes of traffic. In talking with the road commission, if you kind of get to that area of Logan's Landing, maybe going more towards Cass, at some points there in the summer, there are upwards of 50,000 vehicles going through there. So it's a critical part for our commerce. It's a shopping district. It's got shopping along throughout the corridor. It also has some very natural elements to it. You have the river itself going through that point at Logan's Landing, so it's a kind of bisecting the corridor. It's connected to the Cherry Capital Airport, which is going under transformation now. It's going to be expanding. They're expanding the terminal. Operations there are growing, so this is the primary corridor that feeds the activity of the airport. There's non-motorized opportunities along that corridor. We had the recent completion of the Boardman Lake Loop Trail. The township right now is working on a connection from that along South Airport down to Barlow to get that residential area connected to that. There's other opportunities for that corridor, and I think it's one of those corridors that, again, it's critical for not just the future of the township, but really for the region. But certainly we have an opportunity to improve upon it. The master plan does talk about our transportation and infrastructure, talks about street and roads and making improvements. Talks about access management plans. So incidentally, with the road commission, I think it was completed in 2018 or 2019 when they did the east-west corridor transportation study, which was really looking at the kind of the urban area, came up with some recommendations, and the very first recommendation talked about access management for the South Airport corridor, knowing that it was a critical corridor and wanting to make sure that it was running efficiently. We haven't really seen any access management measures done on that corridor, but I think part of the challenge is that those access management improvements really require both the transportation entities, agencies like the Road Commission, and the land use component like the Planning Commission looking at zoning and so forth and development reviews, really working together. The whole land use transportation relationship really has to be emphasized, because it's not just access management just isn't looking at the roadway, but it's also looking at the interface of that. It's looking at what type of land uses are going in there. It's looking at where parking lots are, driveways are, the whole infrastructure along that. And so it really requires kind of those two facets to be looked at the same time in coming up with some recommendations for that. So knowing that this is a priority in both for the township, for the road commission, and knowing that we've just completed the township master plan, thought it would be important to kind of start looking at this this critical corridor and seeing if there are things that maybe we can do in terms of taking a little bit of a deeper dive into that corridor and maybe potentially facilitating a process that develops a plan for it. So what I've kind of outlined here is something we've developed as kind of a conceptual process. This is really just kind of a summary of something that would be a lot more detailed, but it's really kind of looking at three components of going through and developing a corridor plan and what that might entail. Now I know as I mentioned, the Road Commission's East-West Corridor Transportation Study was much larger. It looked like at a lot of different other facets, and it also primarily looked at basically the transportation facilities. We would be looking at something a little bit more comprehensive. It would be looking at the land use development along with the transportation. So it'd be something that we would start some initial discussions, certainly with the Road Commission as our primary partner, but it also could lead to other discussions, whether it's property owners, local businesses, other public entities on that corridor. Certainly it would make sense to look at this not just in Garfield, which it's primarily in Garfield Township, but also that segment that is in East Bay Township, so we have the full length of it. And certainly that would also benefit the Road Commission because they're looking at this entirety. We thought it could, some of those initial discussions and are intended to be finding out what the position is of those different jurisdictions, but also to really kind of maybe start at a smaller point is we thought maybe having a discussion purely looking at Logan's Landing. Knowing that it's the crossing, we know that there's been some potentially changeover in ownership on that, in that area, so we know that there's potential for redevelopment. Essentially the Lake Point PUD, which you saw was introduced to the Planning Commission earlier this month, that owner there is also looking at potentially doing acquisition and acquiring some of that Logan's Landing and maybe doing some development changes there. We also know that the Road Commission is concerned about that crossing, ensuring that it's, there's culverts that are there. They're understanding that those have a certain lifespan. They're looking at options to improve those. We also know there's kind of, while there's the road crossing, there's also kind of the north, south kind of mindset. We have this county park there. The township owns parkland to the south of there in the Boardman Valley Nature Preserve. There's been efforts previously to do restoration along the river with the dam removals upriver and so forth. So there could be some opportunity to at least talk about that in maybe a smaller kind of pointed area along the corridor, but then eventually maybe expand that conversation out along the full 6-mile corridor. As part of those discussions, we would also start doing some background investigation, revisiting the east-west corridor transportation study, looking at any other studies that have maybe been done along the corridor. Before the master plan was done, there was a sub-area plan that was done, the Garfield neighborhood plan, that was done in terms of focusing on the redevelopment of Cherryland Center. So revisiting that, with the goal of this investigation and these discussions is really to lay out what the planning process would be, to put a scope together. What are some of the objectives? What's the process? What's a timeline? And just kind of get a good understanding before that process starts, what that would actually look like. And then from there, kind of moving into the second part would be the actual kickoff of that corridor development plan process. And it would involve, as typical of a lot of our planning process, community engagement to identify issues. So what are the pluses, but what are the minuses, what are the challenges? And we do that through surveys, meetings, open houses, focus group discussions, talking with partners, seeking out technical assistance, and really kind of identifying some of the challenges and opportunities along that corridor. At the same time that those conversations are going on, there's some assessment work done. There's looking at those existing plans, maybe in a deeper dive, assessing, gathering additional data on land use patterns, transportation, demographics, maybe even conducting a market study for that particular corridor, knowing the primary commercial operations that are located there, looking at the natural features there, seeing if there are any challenges related to resiliency, things such as stormwater and stormwater management along that corridor. So as that assessment work is done and the community engagement information is wrapped up, the goal from there is to develop a visioning process, which would be looking at conceptual solutions to some of the challenges that are along that corridor. So things that may be brought up by the community, business owners, property owners, and so forth, and then also the data and information that's gathered, is to start coming up with ways that that corridor can be improved upon. Certainly, it's developed and it's built out, but we do know that there is constantly change over in that. There's change in ownership, there's change in land uses, there's opportunities to reconfigure things. Intersections can be adjusted, driveways can be altered and relocated. Sometimes there can be shared driveways, there can be parking lots that can be adjusted. Additional infrastructure can go in there, such as sidewalks and so forth. There can be, new street lighting or altered street lighting. There can be things, the road commission has done things such as they have done signal improvements. They've also developed a system in there that monitors the traffic so that the signals are more responsive to the traffic that goes through there. And for myself, I drive that corridor twice every day, and I do notice the signals change. It's not predictable, and depending on your timing of when you're going that and the flow of traffic, whether it's on South Airport or some of the side streets, it does alter. So I do see that the changes in the improvements that the road commission has done to the signalization on that and how that is impacted. So all those things are continuously have opportunity to improve on that corridor, to make it more efficient, but also to improve the appearance of the corridor. There are certainly a lot of investment is being made on that through the private development that's going on in that corridor. And we want to see more investment in redevelopment of that. It's important to recognize that we can ultimately improve the corridor through some design elements and implementation of those. So coming up with some conceptual solutions isn't the actual design plan, but it gives us a sense of maybe some options to look at, and then further have some conversations with the public to refine those. And then from that, actually get into a development of a design plan. And that's when you started getting into the details you start getting into maybe some of those improvements of what those would be, where they maybe some consolidation of driveways or parking lot designs, where are those, maybe some sidewalk improvements going to go in, utility improvements, stormwater, where there needs to be some improvements there. Some of that area crosses floodplain, we have railroad crossings there, can those be improved upon? And then once that plan is developed, it works towards implementation. And fortunately for us, the state of Michigan affords us a lot of different tools to do different, from the public side, we have things like Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, and probably a one that's really of value to us is the Corridor Improvement Authority. And if you recall, when we saw the presentation that was done for East Bay Township, and they're looking at the opportunities for doing a Corridor Improvement Authority, I think the important thing is to look at it is that is a public investment in that corridor, and we can leverage that with the private investment. So for all the property owners there that are building buildings, that are expanding their businesses and growing, it's really about matching those resources together to know that the public investment that's made can coincide with the private investment, so that it creates great value for the benefit of both the public that experiences and travels and visits that corridor on a daily basis, as well as the businesses that are growing there and provide jobs along that corridor. So that's kind of it in a real quick nutshell about the concept of really developing the corridor plan. And as we learned from when we saw that presentation about East Bay, is knowing that the plan is really a foundation for a very long-term process. It creates that vision and guidance, and knowing that it's going to take years to go through and actually make those improvements. But we know that South Airport is going to be in place for the foreseeable future. And if there are ways that can be improved upon it, I think this process really sets the tone for that and allows for us to really make those improvements. We know that what is there today isn't always how it's going to be, and if there are ways that we can work towards making it in a much more improved environment, I think it's going to be really critical. Working along with the Road Commission and other partners in there, such as the business owners and the private developers along that corridor. So what I wanted to do is just kind of share with you kind of the concept here. The goal is, is just to hear some your feedback and ideas. Ultimately, I'd like to share this with the Township Board and see what they think, but we thought we'd start with the Planning Commission just to kind of get your thoughts and ideas of the possibility of doing a corridor plan for South Airport Road.
Thanks for doing this, John. What do people think?
It's a huge undertaking. They've got some major capacity problems with their road. So the road commission's kind of in a bind too.
Looks to me like it would take a pretty fair amount of time to get from point 1 through point 3. Have you got any wild guesstimates of the time frame that might require?
Well, I always think a planning process is easily 2 years out, and then most likely something like this I would say is going to be longer. I would say probably a 3-year process, because the goal is to engage and build cooperation and support. And that's just to get to the point of actually developing the plan. But yeah, it takes time. And that's why when I talk about that initial part, having those initial discussions, is really about building lines of communication that allows to build partnerships, so that this isn't something that we're going to do by ourselves. Certainly we essential number one partner is the Road Commission, but there are others that we can work with. And the idea is that through those conversations, building, sharing values, and I say, look, something can be done here. I hear, kind of anecdotally where some people are like, well, I don't really like to go down South Airport. I don't want to go to those businesses during the day because I don't know if I'll be able to pull out of there because of the traffic and so forth. And I don't think we're necessarily going to solve the traffic flow, but in terms of it's going to be there, but in terms of managing it and improving that is certainly something that we can engage in.
Other commissioners, any comments or questions or ideas that you want to throw out at this
I'm
point?
looking forward to establishing a priority list, for lack of better things, so we know where we're gonna start and where we're gonna head. Because this is a huge project.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think the community involvement is very important, along with the property owners and business owners, and getting their feedback and how to utilize this plan and rolling it out.
I think when the word gets out, if we get serious about it, we'll have a lot of public input.
Yeah.
I think we will.
I remember you mentioned that there's a corridor study, maybe a little bit already in process with East Bay. Is that with the road commission, or is that with MDOT?
So that was led by the township, but I think they engaged with MDOT on that.
Okay. Do we know, has the county road commission in any part of the county, have they ever engaged in a process like this yet? Does anybody know?
Specifically with the local unit of government, I don't believe so. I mean, the east-west study that they did was pretty comprehensive, and did engage a lot of local units, just because it was more than just, they were looking at multiple corridors. And certainly the Hartman-Hammond project more recently, even though that's been shelved for the time being, did engage. That one was, before it was, the process was shelved for the time being, I thought was done fairly well. I mean, they worked with, they had their OHM was their engineering company, and I thought they did a very good job engaging, and I thought they were on the right path. So they've had some experience, maybe not as so pointed as just looking at one roadway.
How do you envision getting this started? Let's say the town board is all in, and it sounds like we think it's a good idea. How do we get it started?
So I think that's one of the things that we thought we would take off a little, kind of a segment first in talking about Logan's Landing. Mainly because it's such a critical thing. I know, we've always thought if there, let's say there was a flood or an event that caused that roadway to be blocked, you could just imagine what the impact would be to not just the road, but to the area in terms of commerce and so forth. And we thought maybe having that conversation with their, initially, is kind of just a small part of the corridor, and seeing what the conversations are and seeing how that goes, with the idea that from there, maybe we can build something larger. But that would at least be much more manageable. Plus, there's quite a few stakeholders that we've identified that would be wanting to be part of that conversation.
Would we have other stakeholders right from the get-go, or would it maybe just be the planning commission and the road commission for the first get-together, or what are your thoughts?
On that one, I think we would look at some of the other stakeholders, for instance, the county with the park there. We've talked with TART Trails, because they've created the Boardman Lake Loop, and they're kind of part of that, and we know they want to connect to the south. So we've kind of identified some other ones that we didn't really get into property owners quite yet, but I think that would ultimately have to involve them a little bit. So it was initially just to kind of see where people were thinking of and some of their ideas along there. But it's really, at that point, undetermined, and maybe having those conversations and seeing where those go, and seeing what the interests are from the different stakeholders to see what, and from that we would use to kind of formulate, scope, objectives, process, and so forth.
I've got a vague recollection about the county's east-west corridor study from several years ago that focused on all kinds of things. I think probably foremost in most people's minds was the possible new bridge. But there was certainly a segment I remember about if that's not going to happen, or look at South Airport Road. Is
And that
there a
access
segment-
management was listed first in the thing before Hartman-Hammond was listed.
So is there a segment of their east-west corridor study that is just a chunk that deals with the South Airport Road part? And is that something that maybe could be provided to all of us so that we're brought up to speed on what the county was thinking in a few years ago when they were doing this?
Yeah, absolutely. We can provide that. And that there's like Steve was mentioning, one of the first recommendations is access management, and it's South Airport Road, which is really ultimately an access management plan is really a design plan. And it would really actually go through the whole corridor, particularly when you think of the area, let's say from Park or like where Value City Furniture, and as you go down to Garfield, where it's kind of probably the most congested part, and to actually go through there and look at that from a design standpoint, and how would we ideally alter that? When you think about the Shell station there at the corner of Lafreniere and South Airport, when that was redone, one of the things they did is there used to be two driveways out onto South Airport, and they did remove the one and kind of moved it to the east edge of that site. So that allowed for still access onto the site, but away from the intersection where you have more turning movements and so forth. So that in a way is and I think there was two actually entrances off of Lafreniere, and they consolidated those. But the access management plan would get into the design of that. Where would we potentially consolidate additional ones? And the site plan review process is really important that we go through at the township here, the planning commission, looking at these sites to make sure that it's done in concert with that plan, in working with the road commission and getting down to the nitty-gritty of that, but actually looking at using that same approach, not just for one property, but all the properties kind of up and down that corridor. So,
And we had started taking a look at that in the master plan. I think kind of both, so our master plan looks mostly at land use, and a lot of the other kind of goals, there's sort of a 10,000-foot view in the master plan, because you have sort of the broader goals, and more of the specific things that the township looks at are land use, zoning, and some of the like utilities like water and sewer. Road commission, concerned about safety, concerned about being able to move cars efficiently, safely through corridors. So I think kind of enjoining these is getting into those details, and would be what is more like this one happened to be low-hanging fruit because we were reviewing a site plan and they were doing major changes and completely redoing the whole site. So it's like, all right, if you're redoing the whole site, how do we make this safer? That's probably not going to be possible on this entire corridor, mostly because we don't want an entire redevelopment of a corridor. There's lots of existing businesses that are all thriving. We want that to continue. But if there's some instances where, all right, if they are going to make some improvements, can we consolidate driveways? Can we do some right in, right out? Can we at least, if not consolidate, can we provide the cross connections before you start looking at consolidating? Can you put in sidewalks that start connecting? We've seen it slowly but surely at Cherryland Center, where almost that entire frontage of Cherryland is going to have sidewalk at this point, and even back into the neighborhoods. And that's kind of part of being able to move and access through that corridor as well. When we were looking up some different examples, it was an MDOT example, but I'm thinking of the one in Petoskey of like 31 and 131, right where they come together.
Yeah. Why don't you actually first show a picture of Lafreniere in South Airport? Do like Google Street View?
Yeah, let's do some Google Street View.
I'll show you just a comparison.
I just need to move this. But where's the guy? Here it is. So this is current.
Yeah, so if you just kind of maybe just look down the corridor, just to kind of give it an idea. Oh, okay,
I was going to do the before and after. So that was before.
Right.
That was after, and the same on Lafreniere Road. So on the corridor.
So just what I just want to kind of show is just the visual.
Where would be a good spot to
Maybe kind of turn around and look at the intersection.
Okay.
I just want to kind of give you just a visual. So you can see, okay, just right there. So you can see all the power poles and lines and so forth going through that area. Very typical of corridors throughout Michigan, throughout the United States. And now if you just go
Yeah,
to US 131 and 31 in Petoskey.
yeah, all right.
Which is a big intersection.
Mm-hmm. So if-
Drop down on Street View on there.
Why is this? Okay.
Okay, so there's a kind of a comparison. They use the mast arms with the light box for the streets. And then one thing you'll notice too, if you can maybe turn to the one side, or
Which way?
I was trying to look at some of the street lamps that
Oh,
are
the
there.
lamps too. There's some on.
So what you'll notice is they underground all the utilities
Yeah.
along there. You'll see boxes along that corridor, both on 31 and 131. But you'll see some of the more refined, like, street lamps that are there. They used a little bit of median strips there, which are planted to limit some of the turning movements, to allow for safer stacking and movement of vehicles. And
So in this case, they kept the drive, but they did limit the movement. So it essentially became right in, right out.
Right out.
Mhm. Same on the other side, I think.
Yeah.
With eliminating the wires, was that the utility up there that made that judgment? Or did somebody else make that judgment for them?
I believe, I don't know the whole story, but my impression is that this was done through the city of Petoskey. So I'm not sure how they
Did they
made
have
it.
their own utility? Like I know Traverse City has a utility.
I don't know that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Then I
Or if
don't know
they-
if this is necessarily possible here, but you can see how it can actually transform the appearance of a corridor when you have the ability to do that. Now, obviously, every time I've talked to utility representatives, they're like, well, it's very costly.
It is.
And it is, and understand that. But what we're looking at here is potentially long-term. And I don't know how, I'm kind of anxious, I'd like to get up to Petoskey and talk with some of their representatives. I'm curious and fascinated by what they've done there. But there is one of the things that, when we look at the mechanism, the ability for the cost of some of these things, for instance, road improvements, utility improvements, landscaping, sidewalks, that's where that corridor improvement authority is really, could be the mechanism that could help to fund some of those things. So that's using tax increment financing to fund some of that. It's also important that the key to that is ensuring that there's continued investment within the corridor. So when we look at Cherryland Center, it's important that there is new investment being made, that the stores, like, if one store closes somewhere on South Airport, it's important that site be, reinvested in. Same thing with the crossings or the Grand Traverse Mall. It's important that the viability of that corridor be continuously fed through new investment. So making it's important that we create an attractive corridor, one that functions and is attractive, and also that incentivizes some additional private investment, which feeds the Corridor Improvement Authority, that allows for those expenditures to happen. So if you think about it, with the city of Traverse City, years ago, when the downtown was struggling, one of the first things they did was create a downtown development authority, which is essentially the same thing as a corridor improvement authority. But it allowed for the ability to make reinvestments in their public investments, and it helped to spur, knowing that they improved some of the appearance of the downtown, also allowed for private investment to come in there. And now when you look at the downtown, it's thriving, and there is a lot of investment in there. I think in essence, South Airport is in a similar boat. It's different. It's a suburban form, but we do know the changes and the challenges of the suburban form when we look at commercial development. Macy's is no longer here. It's like, it's kind of a cornerstone to what is historically been, Garfield Township and some of the big box development where it's really been thriving. And yet we're kind of in this kind of unpredictable era now. And we realize that commercial development is not necessarily going to be the same as it has been. So it's imperative that we kind of look at ways to make investments into this corridor so that there will be additional private investment made into the corridor. I think just, hoping for somebody to come in and fill some of those spaces isn't going to do that. I think we need to work towards ways to invest that. So this is just, I'm not suggesting that this is, the route to go, but it does show that public investment, in my guess, is probably has led to some additional private investment in there, is something that we really need to be thinking about in terms of this corridor.
Since you brought up the mall, as part of a corridor improvement authority, can you impose additional design standards upon a corridor? So I'm thinking about the monument signage in front of the mall, and every time I drive by, I'm like, man, that could look really nice if it was redone. So can funds be used towards those sort of improvements? Because like you said, those are the things that draw in additional commercial development. A developer wants to see a place that's looking good and that's attractive, and there's some placemaking components. So can placemaking components and signage requirements or schedules be incorporated as part of a corridor improvement authority?
I think it's going to be a partnership between both the public entity and the private sector. When John Michelangeli was doing the presentation on East Bay's corridor, he talked about that the importance is not just to make the corridor look pretty with sidewalks, landscaping, benches, but also work with the private property owners to have kind of similar design elements. Like he talked about, just something as simple as light poles. That the light poles you have along the corridor might be the same type of light poles that are in the interior of the parking lots that are there, and some of those design elements. And I think it's working in concert with them. The Corridor Improvement Authority would allow for, since it's collecting public tax dollars for public expenditures on that corridor, so things that are in with the right-of-way would allow for that. I think there could be some standards that are placed for the development that would ensure that there is coordination, so they do have some more consistent design. But yeah, I totally understand what you're saying in terms of appearance and attractiveness, and it's interesting because as much as the busy that area is with the crossings in the Grand Traverse Mall, I think really looks fairly nice along there. And the interesting thing that I always like about that corridor is there are actually no signs on that portion of the corridor. When you go around that bend there's no freestanding signs. You don't see a sign for a home. Well, I think there's for maybe Aldi or whatever, but for the most part, it's just, you see the mall sign there. You see a few signs, and it's interesting because there's no, Walmart doesn't have a freestanding sign out there. Home Depot doesn't. Target doesn't. But you can see them generally, and people know. But that certainly has a certain value and attractiveness to that corridor. I think it can be even improved upon even more. But certainly the collaboration, I think, between, the public entities and the private developers, I think, is critical. So.
I think as you're talking about the crossings, I'm recalling there was a lot of give and take with the developer in that project, but they kind of oriented some of the stormwater retention stuff into nice garden-looking features along the front, and they put it in a gazebo, and they did a few other things, so it was a win-win situation for everybody. They wanted their place to look nice and be attractive, and that's certainly what we wanted, as opposed to just a big box. And I think you kind of got it in that part of it, at least. Molly?
If you form an authority, are there other opportunities for state grants, federal grants, all those things? So if one was formed, it's a different entity. You don't have to, you might have other opportunities.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that that's the purpose of the plan. I'm just knowing that that's a pretty powerful tool that the township could utilize. But certainly, it's about identifying what resources might be out there to help the improvements. And I always think it's important to, at least it's my thought, in that when you create those mechanisms, that they have purpose and that they have, the improvements that you want to be made have to really be clearly identified. And how you how you apply that authority is really important. If you, you don't create the authority just for the idea that they're gonna do the, like, improvements along the corridor or whatever. No, it's a mechanism, it's a funding mechanism, so you have to have purposes of projects listed, storm sewer improvements, driveway improvements, landscaping, whatever those costs are identified, and that's the mechanism to fund that. Once those projects are done, you can either, you can potentially eliminate the authority, it doesn't have to be in perpetuity, or you can reset the base on that for the tax increment financing portion of that. So it allows for that increase in the value of the properties there to be recognized as, tax revenue back to the township. I think there's a lot of things that it can be done, but the most important is that it has defined purpose in it, that it be constantly adjusted and evaluated. But certainly there are other, opportunities for, funding sources and so forth.
So tomorrow you're gonna be visiting with the town board about this, or the next meeting, I don't know if it's tomorrow, but.
Well,
10th, I think.
if you think it's be worthwhile, I would hope that this might be something that would be interesting. I don't know what your kind of thoughts are generally. Does it make sense?
What do we think about this?
It's good.
It'll keep us busy a while, that's for sure.
It's a
Good
big
investment.
project. It's been a while since master plan was a big project too, but this one will be a really big project, and I mean, just moving the utilities to make it not look so trashy would be, that's pretty big. Just that part of the planning, but I think as long as we can lay it out, or you can lay it out for the town board, I mean, certainly there's gonna be some investment from the township as well, and, gotta make sure they wanna do that.
And I think at this point, we're just talking about having conversations. Doesn't mean we'd lead into that process. I think certainly, talking with the road commission about this and
Yeah.
see, would be, the critical piece, and just to see, what interest level is that we can work in. And from those conversations, maybe not a full-scale plan, but maybe a, segment here or something done over here is enough. For instance, like we always talk about that really congested areas, maybe those are just the focus, and maybe there's some improvements, made there. Certainly, I think we have a lot of strength to bring by the various partners. From our standpoint of, bringing the land use, through the zoning and site plan reviews and development reviews. The road commission has strength in terms of engineers and design, and all of that if we were to really kind of work together, really bring a lot of resources to the table. And that's why I think some of these processes, I know a lot of people are like, well, you need to go out and get a consultant or something. I don't necessarily believe in that. I think we have a lot that we can bring. We maybe use consultants for maybe a small study or something or whatever, but I think we're at the point now where we've kind of done a lot of the larger studies and analysis, and what we really need to do is get on to those. I really look at this development plan as more of the action plan that actually has the different improvements that we really want to make, as opposed to the larger scope of things. I think we can mine a lot of that data and information's already been done, whether it's, through our master plan, the east-west corridor study, the Hartman-Hammond stuff. There's the MPO, the TTCI that's been established. There may be some resources there that we can tap into, but this is really kind of trying to get down to the nitty-gritty and actually talk about driveway placement, parking lot consolidation, sidewalk here, and get into some of those detailed things and finding out how we can actually make those improvements.
And like if consultants ever came into play, like someone with an expertise in some like site design or engineering would be helpful in details like that. And perhaps road commission, they have some engineers on hand that have looked at some of this and helped influence the east-west study as well. when we want to get into those details, perhaps that's something that could be of value. I did want to mention, since you were talking about the master plan as well, obviously we would want the town board to be supportive, and we would want the public support and engagement. Our initial public engagement, though, did occur in the master plan, and we were looking at this earlier today, the community survey that was kind of kicked off the master plan. There were a couple questions, one of which, Garfield should incentivize redevelopment of outdated commercial and industrial areas, had at least 87% agree or strongly agree. And Garfield should fund the improvement of commercial corridors such as South Airport Road through limiting signs, building sidewalks, reducing driveways, adding trees, etc. Had at least 75% in that agree or strongly agree. So kind of going this direction was, from a 10,000 foot view, even like looked at back then, it was like, yeah, that general direction is something it seems like there would be support for. So now it's just getting into the details and how far do we want to go.
I think it might be interesting to pick as much of the brains of the Petoskey people as you can. I'm thinking historically, it's sort of low-hanging fruit to try to improve the corridors like in Hammond Road, or when we did down by the Olson property on 31 South. It was largely green space and not very developed, and it was a little more manageable to see tangible results with some access management. Whereas we sort of throw up our hands at South Airport, it's already all built. But so was US 31 and 131 in Petoskey. And yet the pictures you're showing, it looks a lot better than it did just a few years ago. So maybe we shouldn't be too cynical about that, and maybe there are ways to, little steps here and there can, like the Lafreniere South Airport gas station stuff you just showed us. Little things might start to add up, and it may not be perfect, but it may be better than it is now, and I think that'd be good if we could get that way.
Absolutely.
Do you know whoever the planner is in Petoskey, or?
Yeah, I don't, and, you know, there's other corridors too throughout the state. We've seen transformation of, you know, existing, you know, urban, suburban corridors, so, but yeah, I mean, we definitely reach out and have conversation, and as well as researching some other corridors around the state. But I think one of the things is to understand that any built area is always fluid, you know. I think there was a time when Cherryland Center was robust and nobody thought it was gonna be ending up like it did, and, you know, quite frankly, now we're seeing some transformation happening at Grand Traverse Mall, which we always was, you know, very active, and we need to realize that there are cycles and there are influences and there are changes, which are challenges, but also great opportunities, and it's, you know, an opportunity for us to know that we can, you know, make improvements and changes in our community. And a lot of it to me is public-private partnerships, working, you know, we have a lot of investors in our corridor, and we want to make sure that, you know, Garfield Township, and particularly South Airport Corridor, is still a good place to invest in businesses. But, yeah, we can definitely look at some other places as well as Petoskey, but definitely, I'm curious, because I just noticed that, you know, driving through there and just going like, this place has changed. And if they did it on state routes, you know, state corridors, and I realize they're within the city, but those, you know, working, if MDOT and the city, Petoskey can work through that, then I think we can work through something here
With the road
in Garfield
commission.
Township with the road commission.
Yep. Yeah, we can reach out. We got a network. We can find the Petoskey folks.
So you'll be talking with the town board, and if you get a green light to at least keep going, let's keep this pretty high on the priority list, at least for study sessions for a while, and
Absolutely.
start working away. I mean, you got a lot of, if it's a 3-year plus maybe plan, we gotta get started someday.
Absolutely.
Well, if you can show the difference, the same way that you did here, the difference between Petoskey, what it was, what it is now, then it's easier to understand, you know, how it's doable.
Yeah, the picture's worth 1,000 words kind of thing. I agree totally. Anybody else with thoughts or comments or suggestions? Anything else you want to pick our brains about?
I think that's it for now.
Okay. Good luck going forward on that. Next item of business is public comment, and we still don't have any public, so we don't have any public comment. Next is other business, and I don't see anything listed there. I guess a couple of questions across my mind. I know coming up, we're gonna be looking at the zoning ordinance and the substantial construction definition and lighting. Anything happening yet in terms of sign review by the legal folks, either our own or somebody else?
Not yet. We did adjust it slightly just to expand some of the scope to really look at that whole section 630 on it. We were looking initially just how it would conform to federal court decisions. We want to do a little bit deeper dive and getting into all aspects of that. In talking with the township manager, it is at the attorney's office. The attorney's just got a couple other things that they're working on right now for the township that are taking priority, so.
Okay. I've been reading in the paper some comments from various people that like to see their names in the paper about the airport maybe getting relocated. Is that simply wishful thinking on the part of some individuals, or do you have any idea or insight whether the airport authority itself is seriously thinking about relocating?
From my understanding, being on the airport zoning board, which the airport zoning board is just zoning for the airport property that's not part of the aeronautics operations, which quite frankly is just a very small portion. It's basically where the Costco is at, and maybe up by Sarah. In talking with airport staff, it's a couple of key issues about the idea of relocating is, one is the ability to actually find available acreage, which I think the airport is roughly about 1,000 acres, and if they were to relocate and site a new location, would be roughly about 3,000 acres. So there's the cost of impacting, the environmental impact of that. Also siting it, so if they were to, let's say, be somewhere out near Kalkaska, is it indicated that at that point, a lot of people probably wouldn't even go to that airport. They'd probably end up going down to Grand Rapids. But probably the most convincing part of that is, and the airport has studied this, from my understanding, is that the cost of that would be about $6 billion, and that would be a cost that would not receive federal resources or federal funding. So that would be probably the one that would. So I think, from my understanding, they're probably going to be there. I agree there are challenges, and I think, at least from my observation with the airport staff, they've been trying to work with, dealing with some of the issues related to the impact, but certainly is something that is going to have to be managed in the foreseeable future, particularly with the expansion of the airport in terms of the terminal and the activity.
I would have been surprised if you were gonna tell us that the airport authority is seriously thinking about moving. But if they were, that would probably impact what are we doing with this corridor study if there's not gonna be an airport there. But if there is gonna be an airport there, then that's another matter that we need to.
How long before they put a parking deck in over there? 'Cause that's a mess, too.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know they're working on that. I think it's a matter of doing the costs and all of that. And that it's interesting because if you were at the airport 20 years ago, you didn't see that issue, and now that issue is clearly an indicator that we've always thought of the airport as being for those visitors coming from the outside. And parking is obviously an indicator that it's locals, and that's really kind of flipped now. So all the added flights, the destinations, all that has really made it an attractive place for, not just this area, but for the whole, Northwest Michigan region to utilize this airport.
Well, people move here
Yeah,
just because that airport's there,
yes.
rather than go to Charlevoix, or
Yep.
someplace like that.
Correct?
Didn't it get up to the third most, or the third busiest airport in terms of enplanements?
Yeah,
Yeah,
after Detroit and Grand Rapids. It's
Yeah.
the third biggest one in the state now.
even over Lansing and Flint, yeah.
Yeah.
So they claimed,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, pretty amazing. Um, Anybody else have any questions about other business? Items for the next agenda, we're gonna have a public hearing on Lake Point.
And we'll forward that letter to Watershed Center, and if we can get any clarification in advance of that, that would be, we'll see
Great.
what we can get.
Yep.
but, yeah.
And we're gonna also, I guess, have the public hearing on the zoning ordinance amendments that we've already talked about on those two topics.
Mhm.
The Scussle findings of fact. High Tops, we just tabled that 2 weeks ago, that's coming back already, it sounds like.
Well, I'm expecting to get some additional information. We did forward it on to the Grand Traverse County Sheriff's Department, so our community policing officers are taking a look at that, provided them with information, copy of the site plan. So we have had some conversation with the applicant. They we gave them a little bit more guidance in terms of what the planning commission was looking for. We haven't heard from them yet, but we expect that we will in providing some more information. We'll see if they have anything for the meeting on the 11th.
Mhm.
We will have a few other added items on the agenda in addition to these, because this went out
Okay.
Yeah.
last week. I can mention them to you. We will have, in addition to High Tops there, we have a project called Aero Park. I'll be honest with you, I haven't actually had the application fee in yet, so there's still, I got the application, but not the fee in. But, so the Aero Park is a proposed indoor entertainment center for the Big Lots location there at Cherryland. So that would be similar to High Tops. They would have to do a site plan review process. We also are expecting application for the former Macy's. So there's a plan for the use of that property. We have not received that yet. We're expecting that tomorrow. And then also a conceptual review for, if you recall, Harris Hills a few years ago was a residential development that went in at the north end of Zimmerman, right north of Brookside Commons. There is a plan for doing some residential development there.
Same developer, John, or a different developer?
Different developer, but they are looking at two-family dwellings, duplexes, so, which is what that's zoned for. And then, which one am I missing? One more.
I think there was those, 3 items of new business. Yeah.
I think that's it. Okay,
Mhm. Yeah.
That'd be a pretty full meeting.
Yes.
yes.
We had, one of our public came in and talked about, made comments during the High Tops presentation about, do we want this to become the bar nightclub area of Traverse City at the Cherryland Mall? And it might be something to talk about. I don't know what we can do about that.
Mhm.
It sounds like we've got another applicant now, so if you have the High Tops, then you got Big Lots turned over to some giant bar entertainment.
Oh, yeah, the Big Lots would be, it's a indoor trampoline park.
Oh.
bounce,
So,
yeah.
yeah,
Something
probably
different.
more geared towards
Okay.
families,
That,
actually.
that kind of indoor
Kind of works
indoor
better
entertainment.
with the
Not that kind of
K1
entertainment.
go-karting
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's what that is. It's not a
Mhm.
bar. And they wouldn't use they would use most of the Big Lots, a portion of that would remain for retail.
Mhm.
Oh.
Mhm.
So,
You also reminded me, though, someone in the public in that meeting also mentioned, kind of in relation to, like, parts of the city that have dealt with that. We did forward it to the county sheriffs, but if we wanted to ask anyone at the city and their dealings with some of the different, because you have your areas downtown, but there are some neighborhood bars and places as well, like in Traverse Heights, just their experience as well in dealing with some of these places, because we obviously don't want to create any problems, but also some of these places exist, and life goes on, I guess. But yeah, how do they manage any of these potential places in neighborhoods? We could ask them as well. I don't know we could ask Sean if there's anyone we could contact the city. So we'll see what we can find.
Anything else anybody wants to talk about? Anything from your,
I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
all right, then we're adjourned.